I'm gonna do a video about cutting people off, and it's called "4 People You Need to Cut Off for 2026." It's so important to know that when it comes to walking in purpose, sometimes these type of people can hold you back, and there's certain things that God wants you to do. God wants you to do on this earth, and some of these people can sometimes get in the way, and sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes it is their fault, but sometimes it's important to when to cut people off and know when that people are holding you back. Sometimes people can hold you back. So I think the first one I'll be saying about is the creep, the creep, the perv, and just the person that's like sees the old you. Sometimes maybe you've gone through sexual abuse or spiritual abuse or narcissistic abuse, and you sometimes post a lot of stuff, post a lot of pictures, and you tend to wear you wear your pain a lot, and you start to post a lot of pictures, and some men like they think, oh, she posts a lot of pictures. um they see it as like insecurity and a way to get in there, like, oh, she's insecure, she keeps posting, she keeps posting, so she might be desperate, so let me get in there. And it's so important. Even some people that maybe you post a lot of pictures as a business, you're trying to be successful, and you attract a lot of creeps and pervs, and sometimes maybe you want to change, you're trying to change in 2026, you want to use your voice more, you want to talk about your pain, what you've been through. And some of these creeps, they just want to see your body, they just want to see what you're working with. Oh, shut up, can you just please stop talking and just use your body instead. Maybe you're so used to wearing your pain, you're so used to wearing your pain, that they just see you as objects. Like, they just say they might see you and you have a voice, and they feel therefore like, oh, why you even speaking, or why you like just just show your body, just show your figure, like, don't talk. And maybe you want to have a voice in 2026, maybe you want to use your voice now. You're fed up with dating, you're fed up with just taking pictures and first trapping, you're like just doing what you used to do. Maybe you dealt with all this pain, betrayal, abuse, and trauma, and instead of going to counselling and therapy, you wore your pain well. You just took pictures, you just wore your pain, and now in 2026, you actually want to do something with your life. You want to be creative in a godly way, and you don't want to be in dark femininity anymore. You actually want to do something purposeful, and you're tired of being you're just tired of being objectified. You're tired of going around in circles, because you're going through spiritual warfare. Maybe you're going through all the spiritual warfare, and you realize that people are just objectifying you. Like, you try to, date, and guys are trying to humble you. You thought they were gonna save you, but they just tried to humble you, and you feel like you've been through enough. But some men see women and see them as like objects and think to humble her. She's been through enough. Like, you've been through enough already. You've been through already, and some of these men are just like, yeah, she needs to be humbled, and you're going through chaos all the time, and you realize that these men aren't protective. They might be flashy, might talk a lot and flirt, and it might be kind and full of flattery, but it just ends in chaos. It just ends in hot and cold behavior, and they made up in their mind that you need to be humbled, and you're probably just fed up. You're fed up with this cycle, and you're fed up with these creeps, and you're fed up with like this attention you're getting, and you realize now that it's just a waste of time, and you're not going anywhere, and you just realize that you feel very violated sometimes by them, and you're like, enough is enough. Like, they're not protective. They're not protective. You feel like this is not fair. This is not on. This can't go on. And it's so important to know that God wants you to use your voice. And you might know it matters, but your voice matters. And some of these creeps and pervs online, they don't want you to use your voice, and you gotta let that go. Maybe you have to create a whole new page. Maybe you have to stop going on these apps and just focus on purpose. Focus on, putting God first, and letting go of people will just see you as object, to see you as a piece of meat. And you thought that, oh, you know what? I'm not going to talk about my pain. I was going to wear my pain instead. I'm not going to talk about what I've been through by people. We're not going to talk about mean girls, mean women in church, passive men in church, or spiritual abuse. You're not going to talk about you being sexually violated by men and feeling powerless. You're just going to wear your shame, and just wear your pain. you just feel like you got nothing to lose. You have nothing to lose. Like, who am I? You know, your leader probably bullied you or said you're nothing or just put you down, and then you feel like, who am I? Who am I really? And you might try to just be in like where you're in, and just be like, you know what have I got to lose? So the first type of person is the creeps, the pervs. You know, that's the type that you need to cut off, and you need to cut off people that just see you as a piece of meat. They want to humble you, and they objectify you, and you feel like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go far with these type of people, but sometimes they see you as just an object. You know, they see you as a piece of meat, and you know, you want to start using your voice. You want to start being a purpose, and you want to start being yourself, and you want to do God's will, and you're tired of it now. You're tired of attention. You feel like it's not going anywhere. You're not respected. You want to be validated. You want to be seen. You want to be understood. You know, you want to be understood. You're probably fed up of, you know, being objectified. You're fed up of like just being seen as me, and you actually want to be in, you know, you actually want to be in purpose now, right thing, and you realize that it's not going anywhere. You know, mean women, creepy men, jealousy, competition, sabotage, witchcraft, failure after failure, and there's healthier ways to deal with it. There's healthier ways to deal with failure. There's healthier ways to deal with abuse. You know, there's creeps everywhere, and I realized I had to do the work to be like, you know what, I've been scammed at work. You know, I had to deal with job scams, had to deal with creep, had to deal with failure and sabotage, someone being very shady towards me. But I did the right thing. I prayed to God. I started to see God as my counselor, and I talked to God about it. Instead of saying, you know what, instead of shutting off and saying, you know what, I'm just a piece of meat. You know, I'm just an object. I'm just gonna, you know, wear my pain instead. I started to actually talk to God. I started to God. I thought that was disgusting. You know, I said to God, you know, that was disgusting what happened to me, and being treated like that, failure hurts, and just start to validate myself. And it's important to journal as well and say, you know what, that wasn't nice. Being scammed, it wasn't nice being scammed. It wasn't nice being abused. It wasn't nice someone sabotaging me and putting me down. I started to validate myself. I started to pray and being consistent and journal about how I feel instead of shutting. Sometimes people shut down by emotionally eating. Some people shut down by you know, self-harm and all these habits, you know, reckless spending. They don't want to deal with their emotions. They don't want to deal with the truth. So it's so important to know. It's so important to know that. It's so important to realize that sometimes these perverts and creeps are waiting around, and I want you to just wait. So this second type of person to cut off for 2026 to be great is familiar people. You know, the familiar. You know, the familiar people that know you as someone else. Maybe they think, oh, you know, it's so good to cut off people that are too familiar with you. They might feel like, oh, you know what, she's quiet, you know, she used to be like this, she used to be like that. And some people can't see the new version of you. They don't want to accept the new version of you. They don't accept it. They're like, oh, she shouldn't do ministry, you know, she's not popular at all. Like, she's not popular. You know, she's not popular. She's not a part of the clique. You know, she's this, she's that, she's not friendly. And when it comes to being prophetic, you're going to be misunderstood. You are going to be misunderstood. So sometimes people feel like, you know, no one likes me, and they're not popular. But when you're prophetic or you're unique, sometimes that can cause people to reject you. You're gonna go through rejection. You're gonna go through rejection, and sometimes when you see the regular people that rejected you, when you see familiar faces that rejected you and they put you down, they know you as somebody that was bullied. They thought, oh, not her. They're like, oh, not her. She was you know, picked on, bullied, and think, no, not her. And sometimes the familiar can hold you back. The same hold you back. They thought, oh, it can't be her. Like, she was a loser. She was the one that smelled. She was smelly. She was ugly. She was this. She was that. She was nothing, and she was bullied, and she was cornered. And they have all these things to say about you. But sometimes, yourself back. You hold yourself back because you are known as a weird kid, or you're known as somebody that's, you know, quiet and awkward, and you think, oh no, I shouldn't say nothing, because, you know, when I tried to, you know, be friendly with them, when I tried to be, they were like ignoring. They were just being ignorant. They're like, oh no, okay, bye now. And they might made you feel like you were weird. They probably made you feel like you were weird, that you just weren't, you don't fit in. And when it comes to fitting in, is overrated. Trying to fit in. So it's important to cut off the familiar. 'Cause sometimes people get too familiar with you. They're like, oh, you know, we know her too much, and I saw her in person. She's too quiet. She's not friendly. She's this. She's that. But prophets are misunderstood. They go through a lot of rejection. You can't make the familiar stop you. You can't make the familiar faces stop. Think, you know what? Um, they know me as somebody that's awkward. They know me as somebody that was bullied, that was cornered, that didn't have a voice. I back then. Why should I have a voice now? And they might see you as somebody that didn't have a voice, and they think, why is she speaking? Why is she talking? Why is that thing talking? And they might see you as a thing, object, and you have to say to yourself that familiar sometimes that can hold you back, because you're basically saying to yourself that they know you as somebody that's not worth it, and they're like, oh yeah, she was treated like garbage, she was not viewed in any kind of way. Like, you have to say to yourself that you have to leave the familiar to grow, because sometimes it can hold you back to think, oh, we missed the old you, just go back to the old you. We need a punching bag, we need a scapegoat, we need a sacrifice. All our issues and problems, we feel better about ourselves, and when we take out on you, we feel better about our lives. When you're the center of abuse, we feel better about ourselves. We need a punching bag, and we want you to come back. We want you to be that person that was a scapegoat and put you down. It made us feel better about ourselves. All your dirty laundry, everything about you exposed. It made us feel better about our rubbish lives, and we want you to come back. So sometimes it's important to leave the familiar, because when people have someone that's, oh, my life ain't worse, my life ain't like hers, and a lot of people love their scapegoat. They love a scapegoat. They love someone they could put down and think, oh, my life ain't bad as hers, though. And they have someone they can tear down with. They could have someone that could drag down and think, oh yeah, we just take anger on her. Like, I'm rejected, but I'm not rejected much to her, because they like to corner somebody and think, oh, you know what, she's rejected, and she goes for rejection, and no one likes her. They don't like her, and they feel bad about themselves when someone is getting rejected and they're getting bullied, and it's not them. Because some people are cowards. Some people are cowards. They like to watch somebody get abused and they think, oh, it's not me. And sometimes familiar will make you second guess yourself. You might feel like, I don't think I should talk because of what I've been through. And sometimes when you see people from the past, they remind you of where you was. They remind you of how low you felt, how depressed you felt. And sometimes it's important to leave the familiar behind, because they can hold you back. They can really hold you back. People that are familiar with you, they can hold you back. They can make you feel like, oh no, I can't move. I can't make moves in 2026 because of people in the past. Sometimes people in the past can hold you back. They can make you feel like, you know what, her, and they don't want to see the new you. They don't want to see the new you. They don't want to see the new version of you, because it makes them feel comfortable. The old you made them feel better about themselves. The one that was quiet, the one that let people abuse her, and the scapegoat. The people that could take their frustrations on, and that you could be their punching bag. Like, oh, my life ain't that bad, that everybody knows your business and you feel violated. So it's important to leave the familiar, because when you leave the familiar, you can actually fulfill God's potential in you. Like, you can actually do God's will and be in purpose. Because when you don't leave the familiar, might try to drag you back down and say, this is who you used to be. They might try to humble you. Like, oh, who do you think you are? Like, who do you think you are trying to step out and do something different? Who do you think you are trying to be something, like trying to be in purpose? Like, come back where you came from. Might try to drag you down. Might try to drag you down and say, you know what, you used to be this, you used to be that, and you were this person, you're that person, and they try to drag you back. You come with us. They have the mindset. They have that mindset of like, who do you think you are? Go back down where you from. And they try to drag you back down and think, this is the person who you used to be. And they can't stand it. A lot can't stand it. They can't stand a new version of you. They can't stand it. They think, go back to who you used to be. And some people don't like growth. Some people don't like growth. They don't like you, stepping in and being in purpose. They want you to be back, drag you back down and say, this is not who you are. Like, why are you changing? So the next one I'll be saying is the monitoring spirit. So the next type of people to cut off is monitoring spirits. They're just nosy. They're just nosy, just want to know what's going on. They don't care. They don't care about you. They don't care how you feel. They don't care about, you know, if you are okay or not, if you're going through spiritual warfare, if, you know, you're having a hard time. They're just wondering what you're doing. Like, they're trying to keep themselves updated. They're like, oh, okay, what's she doing? What's she up to? They don't care. They don't really care. They don't really care about your well-being and if you're going through anything. They're nosy. They're like, oh, is she successful yet? You know, what is she doing? What's she up to? And sometimes monitoring spirit, just like, oh, they just want to know what you're up to, and they don't care. They're nosy. They're very, very nosy, and it's a way to try to find your weaknesses. Oh, you know, what is our weaknesses? What will tear her down? You know, what would tear her down? And they have this fake concern. They have fake concern. They think, okay, okay, what is your worst nightmare? What would you hate? Like, what do you dislike? They want to know your dislikes. They want to know your likes, and they're very, very nosy, and that's why I'm very careful. That's why a lot of people hurt in church, because they think they have someone that cares about them. Oh my gosh, she's opened up to me. She's opened up to me. She's telling me everything, and she's opened up to me. She's saying everything, and wow, I feel so close. I feel a bond, but it's just a monitoring spirit. It's just people just nosy. You got to cut off nosy people in 2026. You got to cut off people that are very, very nosy. They're very, very nosy. They just want to know things about you so they can use it against you later. They want to use it against you later. Think, oh, what are your likes? You know, what church do you go to? You know, who's your pastor? Who's your role model? You know, what's your goals? Don't tell them nothing. Don't tell them nothing. You know, keep a healthy distance and be careful, because they're just nosy. Fake concern, false humility, fake concern. Sometimes they get intimidated, they get scared. Sometimes they're very scared. They think, okay, what are you gonna do so I can copy? Because they're very nosy. They want to know what you're up to so they can do it before you. They think, okay, what are you up to? What are we gonna plan to do? I need to copy, and you know, they try to get before you because they're very, very nosy. They're very, very nosy, and they try to get there before you do. Like, oh, so what are you doing there? And it seems like concern, and it's nice to eat. I get to have people that care, and they want to know about me. Sometimes some of these people are monitoring spirits, and you have to be very careful. You have to be very, very careful. And the last one is Church Ahab. So this is the last one. Church Ahabs. You definitely need to cut these people off, because when you're talking about, you know, especially spiritual abuse, if you're talking about, you know, abuse in church and spiritual abuse or church hurt, they're the type of people that be like, oh my gosh. They're the type of people like, oh my gosh, my pastor don't see this. They're trying to please their pastor. They're trying to please the pastor. They're intimidated. You know, a lot of leaders are Jezebelic and intimidating and gaslighting, and they're very, you know, demonic and intimidating, and they use word curses. They're miserable, and they're bitter, and they use intimidation. And some of these church Ahabs are not aware. They're bewitched. They're foolish, and they're just ignorant, and they feel like, oh my gosh, why is she rocking the boat? They might see you maybe you want to talk about certain topics, and you can sense that they don't want to press like or support because they're scared of what the pastor might say. And, oh, you support that? You support that? It's not real. What's she talking about is not real. They try to do gaslighting stuff. And some of the church Ahabs are scared of confrontation. They're scared of confrontation. They'll say, yeah, okay, I won't support it. And they're very easily influenced, and they're brainwashed, and they have a mind of their own. And, you know, these church Ahabs, their identity is in ministry. Their identity and self-esteem is in ministry, not in God. Is in ministry. They feel purposeless. They feel empty. They've got low self-esteem. They've got low self-worth. They're desperate for community, but they're very desperate. They don't like their own shadow. You know, prophetic people can be Ahabs. They need somebody. They feel powerless. Ahabs go around saying, oh, Ahabs are like, oh, I don't get power. I want power. And Jezebel said, I give it to you, but you have to shut up. I'll give you power. You know, I'll give you power, but shut your mouth and just be quiet. They're saying, oh yeah, they're not their head. They nod their head. You know, they nod their head and go, okay, Jezebel, okay, I'll do what you say, and they just end up just, yes, Jezebel, I'll do what you say. So these church people, some of these church people, they're Ahabs, they're bewitched, and they want power. They're obsessed. That's why it's so important. That's why it's so important to not be power obsessed, because when you're obsessed, you're insecure, and you've got low self-esteem. Sometimes the Jezebel sees that thinking, you want power, don't you? And Ahab's like, yeah, I do want power. Shut up and don't talk about nothing. Focus on image, on, you know, the image of church, and be quiet. And so when they see someone talking about like don't idolize when they see someone talk about spiritual abuse. Don't idolize leaders. Don't, when it comes to witchcraft and things that are serious, they just sit there and think image, remember image and they stay quiet, and they stay Ahab, and that's the type of people you need to cut off. You need to cut off people that are passive, that are weak, that are bewitched. You can't be talking and being empowered by God to speak, and you Ahab trying to tear you down, thinking, don't rock the boat. Have Ahab's like, oh, don't rock the boat. It's not that serious. It's not that serious, because they're empty. They've got low self-esteem, and their self-esteem is in church, not in God. So they do their best to please they're in people-pleasing mode. They say, oh, God told me to do this. No, it was their low self-esteem. They're empty, and they don't like their own company, and they're scared of their own company. They're scared of their own shadow. They need people. They're very desperate. They need people around them to feel better about themselves, and they don't really have alone time with God. They practice. They sometimes the prayer is it's not intimacy. It's performative. It's very performative. It's like I want to please the pastor. I want to please churches, and God's like, I don't know this person. God's like, I don't know this person. You just have this person that's obsessed with image and performance. So it's important to know that. When it comes to New Year's, don't tell people your plans. So don't be, don't try to go around speaking about what you're gonna do, because sometimes people are very, very jealous. The crabs in the barrel mentality. They have the crabs in the barrel mentality, like, oh, you're going down with the bitter. A lot of people are very, very bitter, and they're miserable, and they've got low self-esteem. They're desperate, and the enablers. You got a lot of enablers, passive people that watch abuse happen and don't do nothing. They numb themselves. Some of them are bewitched. Some of them are desperate for company. Some of them are got low self-esteem, and they're empty, and they're saddest, and they just don't mind. They don't mind seeing abuse and do nothing, because they're cowards. So, hope that helped. If you need any counselling or coaching or prayer requests, email me. Thank you for listening.